Hi, I'm Zarina. The day my mother told me, "We're cutting you off, completely," she sounded proud, like scrubbing me out was some kind of spring cleaning. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just stood there, quiet. And then my phone rang. "Ma'am, your company just crossed $69 million. She went pale. My brother dropped his fork. And in that moment, I realized something. They thought they erased me. But I'd already rewritten everything. Before we dive in, what's the worst thing your family's ever said to you? Let me know in the comments. I read every word. I hadn't been to my parents' house in over a year. When the message came through, family meeting, Sunday, be on time. I stared at it for a full minute. No hello, no warmth, just orders. Still, I went. Against my better judgment, I showed up 5 minutes early, clutching the pie I baked from scratch. Foolish, maybe, but part of me hoped it meant something. The house looked the same. Peeling shutters, mismatched patio chairs out front, that faint lemon-scented cleaner Mom swore made everything feel put together. But inside, the air was different. Cold, stiff. Like I'd walked into a doctor's waiting room, not a family gathering. I stepped into the living room. There were 4 chairs, 3 sturdy ones pulled close together, the kind with wide arms and firm cushions. Eli, my brother, was already in one. Miriam, my sister, perched on another, tapping her French manicured nails on the armrest. Between them sat Mom, lips pursed, her eyes scanning her phone. Dad was off to the side, on the edge of the couch. Silent. Always. Then there was the 4th chair. It was small, wobbly, tucked awkwardly in the corner next to the bookshelf. That was mine, apparently. A little afterthought, like someone said, "Oh, right, Zarina's coming. Grab something from the garage." I sat carefully. No one said hi. Not even Miriam, who used to sneak into my room as a kid when she had nightmares. They looked at me like I was a stray dog that wandered in and made itself too comfortable. Mom cleared her throat. "Let's get started." Just like that. "No, how have you been? No, thanks for making the drive." "Zarina," she began, her voice clipped and smooth, like she'd practiced in the mirror. "Your father and I have made a decision. It's time we move forward as a family, in a way that's healthy." Miriam crossed her legs and leaned back like she was watching a tennis match. Eli just smirked. Mom continued, "We've decided that it's best for all of us if we sever financial ties. Going forward, we won't be involving you in any family discussions or decisions. You're free to live your life." I blinked. That was it. Not a screaming match, no accusations, just clinical rejection. I should have seen it coming. Honestly, part of me had. Still, the ease with which she delivered the sentence, it hit different. She looked proud, triumphant, like she'd finally scrubbed a stain off her porch and could breathe easier. My mouth went dry. I stared at her, then at Dad. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. And in that silence, memory flooded in like cold water. The time I paid for Eli's DUI attorney because Dad said, "He's just a boy who made a mistake." The 3 months of Miriam sleeping on my couch after her second divorce, crying into my throw pillows while I paid her rent and fed her dog. Not once did they say thank you. Not once did they ask how I was doing. Back then, I didn't mind. Loyalty felt like a virtue, until it didn't. I thought of the countless times I bit my tongue when Mom said things like, "You and your little paint projects? Real jobs don't leave color under your nails." My art studio was a joke to her, a hobby, an indulgence. I looked at her now. This woman who raised me to believe that approval came with strings and silence. As I stood to leave, I reached for my coat. That's when my phone buzzed. A call from Peter, my financial advisor. I hesitated, then picked up. "Zarina," he said, sounding more breathless than usual. "Just a heads up, your company stock hit 69 million. You officially passed the projection we set for next quarter. Congratulations." I didn't smile. Didn't gasp. I just said, "Thank you, Peter," and ended the call. The room was dead quiet. Miriam sat up straighter. Eli's grin faded. Mom's jaw slackened slightly. Dad finally looked at me. I turned, slow and calm, looked them each in the eye. "Well," I said, sliding one arm into my coat sleeve, "I guess you really did just cut off your biggest investor." I walked out without another word. No drama, no screaming, just quiet dignity, and the sound of their stunned silence pressing against my back. But what they didn't know was how long I'd been preparing for this. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that I'd been preparing for that moment for years, not in a loud, dramatic way, not with shouting or ultimatums or storms out of the room. No, I prepared the only way I knew how, quietly, carefully, and with every bruise they didn't even bother noticing. That night, after the family meeting, I didn't cry. I drove straight back to my studio, parked my car under the flickering backlight, and let myself in through the side door, the one no one else had a key to. The whole space smelled like linseed oil and turpentine and fresh wood, comforting, familiar. It was past 10. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I liked it better this way, with just the soft amber glow of the drying lamps over my latest canvases and the moonlight stretching through the skylights. I moved slowly through the room, fingers brushing the edge of an unfinished frame, knuckles trailing across the paint-streaked table I built with my own hands. This place, this was mine. Nobody ever asked to come here. Nobody even knew what I really did here. And for a long time, that was exactly how I needed it. You see, they didn't just cut me off that night. They'd been cutting me down my whole life. I remembered high school graduation. Eli had crashed his car into a tree a week before while driving drunk. My parents decided that flying to his college's alumni fundraiser was more urgent than showing up for mine. I walked that stage alone. I scanned the crowd for someone, anyone, but they weren't there. Later that night, I got a voicemail from Mom. "We're so proud of you, honey. We'll celebrate next week, after we sort out this legal mess with your brother." That celebration never happened. A few years later, I got accepted into a local art institute. Nothing fancy, but it was my dream. I remember showing Mom the acceptance letter, my hands shaking with excitement. She barely looked up from her crossword puzzle. "Real artists end up broke, Zarina," she said. "Why don't you do something stable, like accounting, or at least graphic design?" I didn't argue. I just folded the letter and tucked it into my drawer between old receipts and dried flower petals. I still have it, by the way, yellowed and creased but intact. Even Miriam had her ways, sweet smiles wrapped around sharp words. "You don't want to outshine people, Z," she'd say, adjusting her scarf in the mirror. "That's not how families work. Be supportive, humble. You know, quiet. Quiet. It was always about shrinking, dimming myself just enough so they wouldn't feel threatened, like every little success of mine was somehow an act of betrayal. I learned early to celebrate silently, to swallow my pride before it made anyone uncomfortable. And for the longest time, I thought that was love. I sat down on the floor of my studio, back against the supply closet door, knees pulled up under my chin. The floor was cool. I closed my eyes, letting the memories swirl. There was this one time. Miriam had just finalized her divorce and couldn't afford rent. Mom called me in the middle of a work meeting, voice trembling with urgency. "You have to help, Z," she said. "Family takes care of family. We don't abandon each other." So I wired the money. Didn't ask when I'd get it back, didn't mention that I had rent too, and no one ever brought it up again. Eli? I paid for his DUI lawyer, twice. "It's just until he finds his footing," Dad mumbled, eyes darting away. Funny how they all assumed I had this endless well of cash and emotional patience, like being the youngest made me the designated fixer. But I wasn't always compliant. 2 years ago, I did something none of them know about. I remember the exact moment. Early spring, Atlanta, still half winter, half bloom. My parents had pressured me into co-signing a mortgage on a house they couldn't afford. Said it would just be temporary, until Dad's pension kicked in. What they didn't know was that I quietly filed paperwork to remove myself as a co-signer. It took weeks. Had to go through a notary, call the bank manager directly, reread contracts late at night. I did it in silence, no warning, No announcement, and just in time too, because the following month they tried to remortgage that same house in my name. When the bank denied the request, they blamed administrative glitches. I didn't correct them. I didn't say a word. That was the first time I realized I didn't have to scream to take control. I just had to move differently, strategically, quietly. My phone buzzed on the table behind me. I got up, walked over, checked the screen. Just a marketing email. I ignored it, reached under the table and pulled out a thick maroon folder from the bottom drawer. The label on the front read, in block letters, Phase 3. I sat down at the drafting desk, flipped it open. Inside were copies of contracts, silent transfers of ownership, statements from brokerage accounts, proof that I'd slowly been extricating myself from every web they tried to trap me in. Step by step, I'd cut every thread. There was a document from my LLC, dated 18 months ago, moving all future studio revenue to a holding company. Another showed I'd shifted all joint savings into a trust, one they couldn't access. And then there were the NDAs. A few names they'd never recognize. Consultants, advisors, even a corporate lawyer who once posed as my old college friend during a family barbecue. All paid, all quiet. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet hum of the heater fill the room. They always assumed I was weak because I didn't fight back, I whispered. They didn't realize silence was my strongest move. The last page of the folder was a checklist, handwritten, slightly smudged from when I spilled coffee on it during a late-night planning session. I ran my finger down the page. Step 1, remove name from mortgage, check. Step 2, consolidate passive income accounts, check. Step 3, secure long-term legal representation, check. Step 4, build fallback emergency assets, check. Step 5, cut ties emotionally, in progress. I didn't smile. This wasn't about revenge. I didn't want to punish them. I wanted distance, clarity, my own space, free from the guilt and weight of being their crutch. But just as I closed the folder, stacked it neatly into the drawer again, and turned off the desk lamp, my phone buzzed once more. This time, it was a text. From Miriam. Save the date. Eli's wedding. You're expected. Don't make it weird. My breath caught for a second, not because I was surprised, but because the performance never ended with them. Even now, after everything, they still expected me to play along. I stared at the message for a moment, then set the phone down face down, as if turning away from the whole charade. But I already knew what I'd do, because they didn't know this wedding would be their last attempt at unity, and mine at final liberation. I didn't open the envelope right away. It sat there on the counter for 2 days, perfectly untouched, like a trap dressed in cream cardstock and gold lettering. I kept walking past it while making coffee, folding laundry, even watering the little fern by my sink. But I felt its presence, heavy, watching me. On the third morning, I finally tore the seal and unfolded the thick, textured paper. You are cordially invited to the vow renewal of Marcus and Cynthia Freeman, celebrating enduring love, hosted by the Freeman family. Formal attire, dress code strictly enforced. Arrive alone. Alone? That line twisted something in my chest. I hadn't heard a word from any of them since my mother's grand proclamation. We're cutting you off. Completely. Now suddenly, they wanted me seated, alone, at a public ceremony. A performance, surely. I stared at the invite like it might reveal something more if I held it at the right angle. And that's when I noticed the signature ink at the bottom. Not my brother's handwriting. Not Cynthia's. It was Miriam's, always the director behind the curtain. Just before tossing it aside, I took a photo and sent it to my cousin Amber. We weren't close, but she'd always had a loose tongue after 2 glasses of rosé. 2 hours later, she replied with a single line, "It's not a celebration, it's a message. Be careful." That night, I sat in bed rereading Amber's text like it was a warning label. The next morning, I packed a small suitcase. I didn't RSVP, I didn't ask for permission. I booked a modest hotel outside the main resort area in Savannah and chose a muted gray pantsuit. Not the pastel floral monstrosities they always pushed. I wore my hair back, clean and low, not to be noticed. I wasn't going there to smile, I was going to witness. The drive from Atlanta took just over 4 hours. I kept the windows cracked, letting in the late spring breeze while the radio buzzed low in the background. On the final stretch, I pulled over at a rest stop and scrolled through Mom's social media. Filtered brunches, garden prep, Marcus's daughter in a custom flower girl dress. No mention of me, not even a whisper. Funny how silence is louder than words. By the time I pulled into the venue parking lot, my nerves had settled into something steadier, detachment. I wasn't here to belong, I was here to remember why I left. The resort was sprawling, white-painted wood and sprawling verandas dressed with roses and fake charm. I approached the front desk and gave my name. The woman didn't smile, just handed me a plain envelope with a map and said, "Back garden, side entry. You're not listed for reception dinner." I gave a small nod. Of course I'm not. The ceremony space was overly manicured, too perfect. A white arch wrapped in hydrangeas stood like a theatrical set against the sunset. People fluttered around in pastel lace and forced grins. No one greeted me. An usher walked by and glanced at my card before waving vaguely toward a back row of folding chairs near the catering setup. I walked quietly, heels steady on the stone path, and sat beside a crate of linen napkins. A woman nearby leaned to another and whispered, "Oh, she actually came?" I didn't react. Miriam took the mic for the opening toast. Her voice rang sweet and rehearsed. "To the siblings who always stood by, never wavered, and never made it about themselves." The crowd laughed lightly. I noticed my mother raise her glass in exaggerated agreement. You know that feeling when everyone's smiling but the air still feels sharp? Yeah, that. The slideshow began. Old family photos flickered across the screen. Birthdays, beach trips, school plays. I saw Marcus at age 10, Cynthia in her bridal shower, my parents dancing at some gala. Then came a photo from my 6th birthday. Me in a yellow dress holding a cake shaped like a butterfly. But my face? Blurred. Badly. Like someone took an eraser tool and just smeared me out of the memory. I sat there frozen, not even angry, just confirmed. My name wasn't mentioned once during any of the speeches. Not a story, not a passing joke. Just edited silence. At one point, my mother clinked her glass with Marcus and leaned over to him, laughing behind her hand. Then she looked directly at me, not smiling, not angry, just aware. When I stood to leave, the room didn't go silent. No heads turned. Until one voice, uncertain whether it was drunk or just cruel, shouted from the buffet line, "Oh, are you gonna pull the poor me card again?" I didn't stop walking, didn't say a word. Just let my heels click against the polished floor until I reached the doors, pushed them open, and stepped into the dusk air. I walked to my rental car slowly, taking my time, listening to the gravel underfoot. I didn't cry, didn't shake. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened the secure folder labeled Scheduled, and clicked Send Now. The email went out to 5 people. Subject line, "Check your inbox." No explanation. No emotion, just an attached file that had been building for years. They thought this ceremony was the grand finale. They didn't realize I was just getting started. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I just kept walking until the glass doors of the venue clicked shut behind me, and the soft sound of my heels met the quiet parking lot. The sky had darkened since the ceremony began, and now Savannah's warm night breeze tangled in my hair as I stepped into the car I'd rented, still parked discreetly behind the overflow lot. 15 minutes later, I was back in my hotel suite, keycard sliding into place with a soft beep. The second the door clicked shut, my phone lit up on the nightstand. First 1 vibration, then 3, then it didn't stop. Group text, "Zorina, what did you do?" Email, "Urgent. Please call me. Dad." Another message, then another, a dozen pings in less than a minute. I walked calmly across the room, set my clutch down, slipped off my heels. Then I picked up the phone and sat by the window as downtown Savannah twinkled below like nothing had happened. The subject line in the email I sent was simple, "Trust amendment, signed and notarized." The file was a PDF scan, clear, crisp, a copy of my grandmother's amended estate plan, quietly signed and witnessed 2 years before she passed. It named me, Zorina Adele Moore, as primary heir to the family's Florida property and controlling interest in the estate-linked trust that funded nearly every luxury my siblings had ever bragged about. The same trust my mother claimed was closed off to me the day she cut me out. And now? They were all reading the truth. 6 months ago, I was kneeling beside Grandma Leona's hospice bed. Her hand, thin as parchment, reached under the pillow and pressed a sealed manila envelope into mine. "Don't let them bury your light," she whispered. "They'll try, but I've already made it harder for them." Back then, I didn't understand. But when I opened that envelope later, I found more than just love. I found leverage. It wasn't just a document. It was a notarized amendment, stamped, witnessed, filed with her lawyer, and yet, after her funeral, no one ever mentioned it, not once. I hadn't said a word either. I waited. I listened. I watched them tell everyone the estate was finalized, that I wasn't part of the plan. Tonight, I simply sent the truth. The first call came in from Lyle, my eldest brother. I didn't answer. The voicemail was short. "What the hell, Zorina? This isn't funny. Where did you even get that file?" Next came a flood of texts from Miriam. She always used full sentences when she was trying to sound composed. "This is very serious, and I'm sure you didn't intend to cause harm, but we need to resolve this offline." I didn't reply. 5 minutes later, the family group chat exploded. "Is this real?" someone typed. Then another message popped up from a name I hadn't seen in years. Frank Halstead, our grandmother's estate attorney. His message was calm, professional. "Yes, the amendment is valid. It was signed, notarized, and never revoked. If you'd like to dispute it, you'll need legal grounds." My father finally entered the chat with one word: impossible. Then my mother: "It was supposed to be buried." That was when I leaned back against the headboard and took a deep breath. I didn't feel angry or smug, just done pretending. I typed slowly. "For a girl you all said was just emotional, I seem to recall legal timelines better than any of you." I pressed send. Outside, I could hear the faint hum of traffic along Bay Street. Inside, my phone buzzed like a hive knocked off its branch. Accusations, deflections, suddenly urgent invitations to talk this through. I ignored them all. Instead, I opened my Notes app, copied a short message, and pasted it into the group thread. "Starting tomorrow, all estate-related revenue will be redirected. Any claims must go through legal. Have a good night." I did. And then I silenced the thread. After slipping into a soft robe, I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and returned to the wide window facing the city. Savannah was still buzzing beneath a dark velvet sky, but I had never felt more still. My laptop rested on the desk across the room. I opened it, fingers hovering for a moment before they touched the keyboard. Then I began typing. ZAM Foundation, LLC, Charter Draft, V1. I wrote the first clause without hesitation. This charter acknowledges Zorina A. Moore as sole founder and principal beneficiary of the Leona Adele Moore Legacy Trust. There was power in those words, but it wasn't about getting even. It was about remembering. Remembering every silent night I spent listening to them toast each other, every holiday I ate alone while they posted photos with captions like, "Just the close ones this year." Every comment that made me feel like the extra piece of furniture in their carefully curated lives. They wanted a finale. They staged a show. But I had just begun. Outside, a soft breeze lifted the edges of the curtains. I sipped my tea, watching headlights glide across the street like slow-moving stars. The bitterness of betrayal was long gone. All that remained was resolve. And just as I started to write the second clause of the charter, something strange happened. A name appeared in the document. I hadn't typed it. It blinked on the screen in the collaborator field. One name. No photo. Just the letters. AM. My fingers paused over the keys, and just like that, the calm cracked open. I was still staring at the final period of the charter when the name appeared like a shadow across clean paper, one that didn't belong. The ink hadn't even dried, figuratively speaking, but there it was. A name I never typed. Co-founder, Malik R. Darian. I froze. The cursor blinked at me like it knew what had just happened. I leaned closer to the screen, rereading it twice to be sure. There was no mistaking it. Somehow, my half-brother had inserted his name into my incorporation documents. I sat up straighter, adrenaline burning away the last trace of sleep. I hadn't seen Malik since the week of Grandma's funeral, and we didn't part with hugs. He always had a way of appearing only when something valuable was on the table. Land, reputation, or in this case, leverage. The clock on the nightstand read 6:42 a.m. The sun was barely creeping through the slit in the curtains, casting the hotel room in a soft haze. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and reached for my robe, heart pounding with a mix of confusion and fury. The shared Google Drive folder, the one I'd archived years ago when we were still testing out business ideas together, must have still had some access open. I thought I'd shut it all down after what happened back in Orlando. Apparently, I missed a door. And Malik walked right in. I brewed coffee while opening the activity log. Sure enough, 2 days ago, someone logged in with a backup access code tied to an old consulting license we'd once used under my LLC. It was him. I remembered that code. He'd begged me for temporary access during a pitch meeting I'd let him sit in on years ago, back when I still wanted to be seen by them as more than the idealistic little sister. Back then, I let him pitch a supply chain module under my business registration, hoping it'd help him get on his feet. He flubbed the presentation, then tried to poach my first client. When I confronted him, he smirked and said, "It's business, Zarina. You're great at vision, but it's the men who execute." That was the last time I trusted him with anything. Now here he was, again, rewriting my future in my own file, without my permission. By the time I finished my second cup, I was dialing Carla's number. My lawyer answered with her usual calm, unbothered even by my rapid-fire rundown of what just happened. "Send me screenshots of the edits and that access code log," she said. "The good news? He hasn't filed anything legally. What he did is more noise than substance, but it's the kind of noise that scares investors if they think he's a stakeholder." "He's not," I said flatly. "Then let's make that clear. I'll draft a cease and desist immediately, and I'll start a trace into every document that email touched in the last 48 hours, just to be thorough." I thanked her and hung up, staring out the window as the city of Savannah started to hum awake. This wasn't just about a name in a file. This was about control and desperation. By 10:30, I'd dressed in something neutral but firm. Navy slacks, ivory blouse, low heels. I was supposed to fly back to Jacksonville that afternoon, but plans had shifted. The family was meeting for brunch at a small spot near the river, and while I'd told them I wasn't coming, I changed my mind. Because Malik would be there, and I wasn't about to let this slide. The restaurant was tucked between 2 brick buildings, with sunlight pouring through the tall windows and illuminating the white tablecloths. When I walked in, the table was already full. Mom, Dad, my 2 older siblings, and Malik seated at the far end, holding court with some ridiculous story about running multi-state logistics. They all looked up when I approached. The clink of silverware paused. "You came," my mother said, voice clipped, like my presence was both inconvenient and unexpected. I didn't answer. I walked straight to Malik, set my phone down in front of him, and tapped the screen. The legal email opened with one sentence highlighted in yellow. "Any unauthorized insertion of names into legally binding drafts constitutes attempted wire fraud and identity manipulation under corporate law." He leaned back, a nervous chuckle escaping him. Whoa, that's a little dramatic. It was a placeholder, in case you needed someone solid on the ground." "Placeholder?" I repeated quietly. "Come on, Z. You've always been the dreamer. I just thought you'd want backup." I leaned in slightly, eyes locked on his. "You're not a partner, Malik. You're not even a footnote in my legacy. You want to build something? Start from scratch like I did." He opened his mouth, probably to toss out some tired excuse about families sticking together, but I was already standing. Enjoy brunch, I said, scooping up my phone. I've got real work to do. I didn't look back as I walked out. I didn't need to. In the car, I sank into the driver's seat and took a deep breath. I felt steady, coldly steady, but the storm wasn't over yet. Just as I was setting the GPS to the airport, my phone rang. Unknown number, New York area code. Hello, a smooth voice answered. Zarina Darian? I'm calling on behalf of Vanden Group. We saw the estate documents circulating. We'd like to back your expansion, privately, independently, without Malik or any other family stakeholders, if you're open to a conversation. I didn't smile, not yet. But I did feel something tighten, resolve. The tide was shifting. And this time I wasn't letting anyone ride it but me. I thanked him and said we'd talk. Then I ended the call and headed back toward the hotel, ready to check out and move on. But just as I walked through the marble lobby and handed my room card to the front desk, the concierge cleared his throat and held out a folded envelope. Miss Darian, someone left this for you earlier. Said you'd know who it's from. I took it. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. It was my mother's. I didn't even make it to the elevator. As soon as I stepped through the hotel's glass doors, still halfway processing what had just happened at that brunch with Malik, the concierge looked up from the counter. Ms. Darian? He said, holding out a slim white envelope. This was left for you about an hour ago. The woman said it was urgent. The paper was thick. The handwriting, angular, deliberate, was unmistakable. My mother's. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I walked past the elevator, through the quiet lobby and into the lounge, found a small corner by the window far from the fireplace where no one would look twice at a woman gripping an unopened envelope like it might bite. When I finally peeled it open, it was just one line. No greeting, no signature. You were never supposed to be more than the glue. We only kept you because your father insisted. No punctuation, just cold truth, flat on the page like a slap that had been waiting years to land. My fingers didn't tremble. I wasn't sure if that made it better or worse. I folded the note back into the envelope slowly, as if giving it more time would make the words rearrange themselves into something kinder. They didn't. I sat there watching the sky dim behind the window, and for a brief moment I thought maybe this was the last blow. Maybe this was the final unraveling. But then the envelope crinkled. Something else was inside. It was a small leather-bound journal, worn edges, familiar. I blinked. This was my childhood family journal, the one Mom kept in the den. She used to call it our shared history. Back then, she said it would be passed down to the most stable one. She meant me, of course. I believed her. I flipped it open. The first few pages were as I remembered, recipes, birthdays, quotes taped in from Reader's Digest. But then, things started to feel off. There were entries about my siblings, my sister's ballet recital, Malik's internship, but any mentions of me were either scratched out, abbreviated, or reduced to vague phrases. May 7th, one child got the honor roll. Good. I was that child. I turned faster now, my eyes scanning for anything, any proof I hadn't imagined that time I won the state science fair or when I saved up my allowance to fix the broken fence on the side of the house. Nothing. Just pages of curated memory where I was either missing or edited into obscurity. And then I reached the back pocket. An old financial log was folded neatly inside. College years. 3 checks. All in my name, all signed with my endorsement. But the deposits, they were made into my sister's account. My stomach flipped. I remembered scrimping to cover books sophomore year, taking a second shift at the library desk because I thought my grant came in short. They took it. They didn't even ask. I sat there staring at that ledger like it was a photo of a stranger wearing my skin. Every cell in my body burned, not from pain, not even from betrayal anymore, from clarity. That kind of clarity that comes when the last excuse slips through your fingers and you're left with the truth. They knew exactly what they were doing. I went up to my room. Didn't bother turning on the lights. I just stood by the window, the journal under my arm, and opened my laptop. I sent an email to Carla, my lawyer, attaching photos of the checks and pages from the journal. Then one to my CPA. I need a full audit, 12 years back, all accounts. And then, after a pause, I added, also request forensic handwriting verification. I want this authenticated. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about naming things. And I was done letting them name me. I didn't call my mother, didn't respond to the note. Instead, I opened a new Word doc and started typing. Not for anyone else, just for me. Dear Zarina, they didn't cut you off. They never had that power. You broke free the moment you stopped asking to be seen and started seeing yourself. You were never the glue. You were the foundation. I saved the file, closed the laptop, and leaned back in the chair. I watched the lights from the street below scatter across the ceiling. And just when I thought it was finally quiet, the door knocked. It was my father. He stood there under the soft glow of the hallway sconce, a man who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His shoulders seemed to carry more than age. They bore the weight of silence. In his hands, he held a box. Not a gift box or something you'd pick up at a store. This one was old, worn, the kind people keep in closets with the things they aren't ready to let go of. "Can I come in?" he asked, voice steady but low. I stepped aside without saying a word. He walked in slowly, like he didn't want to wake the room. The air inside the suite still smelled faintly of old paper and the envelope my mother had sent. He looked at the open journal on the desk, at the stiff bourbon glass I hadn't touched, but he said nothing about them. Instead, he placed the box on the coffee table and sat down across from me. "I know I've been quiet," he said, "and I know what she said to you, but I never agreed with it, not one bit." His hands rested on the edge of the box, fingers trembling slightly. He didn't look at me when he spoke. His eyes stayed on the wood grain beneath his fingertips. I didn't interrupt. I needed him to keep going. Your mother always needed to be right, and loud, and final, and I didn't have it in me to keep fighting her, not after the heart thing. He tapped his chest lightly, like the memory of it still pulsed there. I nodded slowly. I remembered the scare 5 years ago, the hospital, the hush around the house, but no one ever told me just how close it had been, or how much it changed him. He pushed the box toward me. "These are yours. They've always been yours." I hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside, there were layers, cards, envelopes, printed out emails, even clippings from local newspapers. The first thing I picked up was a birthday card. Unsent. The year on the corner said 2009. "I bought that the day you defended your thesis," he murmured. "I was so proud of you, but she said it wasn't worth celebrating, said it wasn't a real job." My throat tightened as I opened the card. His handwriting was unmistakable. A simple message, "I see you, kiddo. Always have." Beneath that, a manila folder labeled Z Investments. I paused. My eyes scanned the contents. Wire transfers, dated years ago. My early seed rounds. One came just before I almost shut the studio down. Another during the IRS scare. All from anonymous accounts. "You?" I asked, barely getting the word out. He smiled faintly. "You never needed my help, but I gave it anyway. Quietly. That way your name stayed yours." For a long time I couldn't speak. All those sleepless nights, the tears I never let fall, the struggle to build something out of nothing, and he'd been there, behind the curtain, holding a safety net I never knew existed. "I watched her rob all of you, just in different ways," he said finally. "Your sister, she got the charm. Your brother, the praise. You got the weight, the responsibility, and you were the first to say no. That scared her." He leaned back into the sofa and exhaled, like something he'd held in for years had finally escaped. "I don't want you to think this is some kind of redemption tour," he added. "It's not. I just needed you to know. You were never disposable to me. Never." I swallowed hard. "Why didn't you ever say any of this?" He looked over at me, and for the first time that night, he met my eyes directly. "Because I was tired, Zarina. And scared. And I thought, maybe I could protect you better by staying out of her way. Silence sat with us for a while. Not cold, not angry, just full. As he stood to leave, he walked to the door and placed his hand on the knob, then turned back. I left the house today for the first time in 3 weeks, he said, because I couldn't let you think I agreed with her. Not after that letter. He nodded once, then stepped out and shut the door gently behind him. I stayed there for a long time. Didn't touch the bourbon, didn't move the box. Just sat in that strange mixture of grief and grace, letting it all land. Later that night, after the city had gone quiet and only the distant hum of traffic whispered through the window, I opened my old email archive, the one from college, the one I hadn't checked in years. In the drafts folder, buried under junk and alerts, were dozens of messages, unsent. Each one from a saved contact labeled simply, Dad. Most were just 1 or 2 lines, some were long and rambling, some didn't make sense. But one stood out. It said, "You weren't the glue. You were the gold they overlooked." I read it twice, then 3 times. My chest felt like it was both breaking and mending at once. Outside, the streetlight flickered once, then held steady. And just when the wounds began to close, I got an invitation, with my name scratched out. I stood by the window, the soft hiss of the kettle filling the quiet of the morning. It had been 2 weeks since my father's visit, 2 weeks since he placed that box in my hands and told me what he never could say aloud. I hadn't told anyone about it, not Ezra, not even Celeste. Some truths needed time to settle, like dust after a storm. And just when I thought the wounds had started to scab over, something thudded into my mailbox with the weight of arrogance dressed in gold foil. I opened the mailbox with one hand, phone tucked under my chin, halfway through reading a grant proposal. My fingers brushed the edge of a thick envelope, ivory, heavy, with a gold seal that screamed performative luxury. The front said, "The Marshall and Porter families invite you." I stopped reading. My niece was getting married. It didn't surprise me they hadn't called. What jolted me was the tagline written just under the main header, "A celebration of unity and family reconciliation." I leaned against the kitchen island, staring at those words like they were from another dimension. Reconciliation? After everything? I flipped open the inner card, the kind with carefully scripted names and glittered borders. My eyes scanned the roles. Father of the bride, Caleb Marshall, mother of the bride, Dana Marshall, and then there it was, maid of honor, Avery Lynn. But Avery's name sat atop something else, a smudged name, scratched through so thoroughly the ink had bled like a wound. My name, Zarina, they had written me in, then crossed me out. It was like a metaphor wrapped in cardstock, beautifully printed, quietly cruel. I sat down at the kitchen table, the invitation trembling in my hand, not because I was hurt. Not exactly. It was the absurdity of it. The arrogance to send it to me and think I wouldn't notice. Or worse, that I'd still show up. They could have left me off the list entirely. That would have been cleaner. But no, someone thought it was a good idea to erase me in plain sight. I pushed the envelope aside and opened my laptop. The wedding website address was printed at the bottom of the card. Curiosity won over good sense. The homepage was saccharine, photos of Caleb's daughter in white lace, some faux candid shots of the groom looking away from the camera. There was a countdown clock, a curated playlist, a charity donation link. I clicked on the bridal party tab, and there it was, still cached on the server. Mock, Zarina, tentative. They hadn't even bothered to clean it up properly. I opened the planning notes section, still publicly viewable for anyone who knew where to look, and scanned the timeline. Months of coordination, bookings, decor inspiration. One note caught my eye. If Zarina's attitude doesn't shift, we'll go with Avery, but give her the chance to redeem herself. Redeem myself? I closed the laptop and stood, walking to the sink. I washed my hands slowly, as if the water could rinse away what I'd just read. Then I dried them on a dish towel that still smelled faintly of lemon oil. Around 3 that afternoon, while scrolling through Celeste's page, I caught a reposted image from the rehearsal dinner. My mother was front and center, chin lifted, champagne flute raised. My siblings were scattered around her, all bright teeth and Instagram smiles. The caption? "The people who truly matter." I didn't feel rage, not the way I used to. No, what I felt was precise, focused, cold. And missing from that photo, conspicuously so, was my father. I picked up my phone and tapped open a folder buried beneath layers of business apps. It was a dormant LLC, one I had co-formed years ago as a strategic investment vehicle. It owned fractional shares in several venues, including the exact property where this wedding was going to be held. It had been my idea back when I was flush with my first wave of funding and still wanted to diversify into hospitality. I'd let it sit for years, untouched. But today it was a key. I called my attorney. "Brad, it's Zarina. I've got a quick question for you. If a company hasn't paid out shareholder dividends and tries to operate on property co-owned by that entity, can we freeze usage of the venue?" He didn't even pause. "If you have controlling interest and can show mismanagement, we absolutely can. You thinking of making a move?" "I'm not thinking," I said. "I'm done thinking." We hung up. I sat still for a long moment, feeling the room stretch wide with silence. Then I picked up a marker and wrote a single word across the back of the invitation: revoked. I dropped it into the trash, closed the lid, and walked back to my desk. The sun had dipped low by the time I finished sending over the legal documents and activating the holding clause on the property lease. Avery would still get her big day. The guests would still arrive, dressed in their borrowed grace and brittle affection. But the gates? The gates would be shut. And above them, something else entirely would be hanging. The breeze off the marsh that morning was still and strange, like the island itself knew something was off. I sat on the tailgate of my truck across the street from the wedding venue, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the clock. 9:56 a.m., 4 minutes, and then, like birds descending all at once, SUVs started to roll in. Lexus, BMW, a couple Cadillacs, the family's entourage, dresses swishing, hair perfectly coiffed, men tugging at collars, laughter and high heels against pavement. They slowed as they reached the iron gates, then confusion spread. One by one, the cars halted, doors opened, heads craned forward, and then came the shouts. "What the hell is this?" barked my brother-in-law, stomping toward the intercom box. My sister gasped, pointing up, because above those elegant gates now hung a long white banner. Sturdy, not paper, embroidered in navy thread. Private event, hosted by Zarina Chappelle Enterprises. The silence didn't last long. My mother slammed the palm of her hand against the gate. "You can't do this! This is our family's day!" Security, 2 men in crisp black polos, stepped forward calmly. "Ma'am, this property is under restricted access today. Event is canceled due to unresolved shareholder disputes." Her face crumpled like she'd been slapped. "Shareholder? What shareholder?" My brother yelled into the intercom. "Open the gate. My daughter's wedding starts in an hour." No one responded. The guests who followed behind began to whisper. Some took out their phones. A few glanced toward the banner, unsure if it was a joke. But it wasn't. Across town, I stood in front of a cluster of reporters just outside a modest brick building, my downtown Charleston office. My attorney stood beside me, calm as ever, flipping through documents like they were just grocery receipts. "Zarina," a reporter asked, voice tentative, "can you confirm that you've halted the wedding at the Oakfern Pavilion?" I gave a small nod. "Yes, as the co-founder of the land trust that funded and manages the venue, and as its largest remaining shareholder, I've exercised a legal right to restrict access today." Some cameras flashed. Another reporter called out, "But your mother claimed ownership last year. She said—" I cut her off gently. "She said a lot of things." That earned a quiet chuckle from the back row. My lawyer stepped up then and held up a laminated page. Per the original 2009 shareholder agreement, Section 14B, all events hosted on Oakfern land must have the written consent of every original equity partner or their legal proxy. Ms. Chappelle's name, placed there by her late father, is still active. Someone gasped. I continued. That clause was never amended, never revoked, and never acknowledged by the people who spent the last decade pretending I didn't exist. Later that afternoon, the headline rolled across the bottom of local news. Heiress cuts off wedding over decade of family abuse, legal, emotional, financial. I didn't flinch. Not when my cousin called me hysterical. Not when my sister left 5 voicemails that swung between screaming and sobbing. Not even when my mother's lawyer emailed some pitiful thread about reputation harm. They'd all forgotten one thing. I was never just the youngest daughter. I was the silent partner, the ghost they left off guest lists, the walking ledger they'd hoped would never speak. But I did speak, and I brought receipts. Late that night, as the coast quieted and Charleston settled into its deep evening stillness, I stood alone in the den of my Ocean View estate. No phone, no noise, just a small, dented tin box. I set it on the fireplace mantel and opened it. Inside were 3 things. A faded photo of me and my father at the land's groundbreaking, both of us muddy but smiling. A plastic token from the ferry we took the first day we toured Hilton Head together, and a folded sheet of paper, yellowed and soft. I opened it with both hands. It was his handwriting. I saw you. Even when they didn't, I knew one day you'd take it all back with grace. I didn't cry. I just sat on the arm of the couch for a long while, letting the words sink in. Eventually, I walked over to the bookshelf, pulled down the old family photo from the Christmas before everything fell apart. My image in the frame had been ripped out. My mother did that years ago. I didn't tape it back. Instead, I set it above the fireplace, then lit a small tea candle beside it. Its soft flame flickered against the glass, and I whispered more to myself than anyone else, "You cut me off, so I grew on my own." The tide kept rolling outside, the wind catching just enough to carry the scent of salt and pine through the open window. And sometimes letting go of the family who buried you is the only way to bloom.